there's a lot of theory in this kind of presentation, a lot of issues that I guess everyone needs a bit of background around. I tend to try and skip through the theory, it bores me. So if any of this stuff on the slide you want to talk about, just ask a question, because I will probably not read a lot of it. We'll be talking about startups, some of the practical issues about what structure you should be using and why you should be using. Then probably a bit more about the evolution, about how structures should generally evolve over time in our business, which is quite important. I worked with a business back in '99, I think. We set them on a path that ultimately saved them about $32 million in tax. So it's a long time frame that you've got to think about these things, but if you get it right, it's very, very advantageous. And if we get some time, tax office use some common issues with the tax office and how they view businesses and how they assess risks, which everybody should be aware of, because the number of times we come across silly things that get you caught up. Well, they're very sophisticated these days. These are your common structures: your sole traders, your companies, your partnerships, and your trusts. Each have merits, each have advantages and disadvantages, and we'll go through some of those pretty quickly. When you consider a structure, there are a number of factors that you really need to go through. And before we implement a structure, it's not like, oh, well, you're doing a tech business, you need a company. We kind of like to talk to you about these kinds of factors and find out exactly what you're trying to achieve. Distributing income tax effectively is obviously important to everybody. Flexibility to grow and generate capital for your business is a key issue too. Asset protection, regulatory requirements, all things that we need to talk about. One of the big things that is often overlooked is your exit strategy. When you're starting a business, you're generally not thinking about selling it in however many years' time or getting out, but it's critical. One structure is a lot less tax effective than another. In a lot of private equity companies, when they come through, if they see that you have a product that's worthwhile investing in, they'll get in. The first question they'll ask you is, what's your exit strategy? We've got 4 years, top of 7 years to invest in you. We want to see you go from nothing to this much in that period of time, and then we're out. And that's all we're willing to contribute. So you have to sell your story about how you're going to build that product in that period of time frame and get out. Sole traders. Sole traders is not a common structure these days. Very good for very micro businesses or businesses with no risk, and there are no businesses with no risk these days. So we certainly never advise anyone to go through with it. It might be good for a person mowing your lawn. Sure, you wouldn't need a cost for actually going through us and doing anything. It's not bad for people generating video game apps either, because there's no real risk in that until you launch it. If you're developing an app that says that we're going to diagnose you medically, and that app comes and says you've got cancer and you don't, well, sole trader structure doesn't work in that case. Disadvantages are that it's just simply, the liability is just too high. If you've got a house, a car, a favourite book collection or DVD collection, all of your assets are up for grabs if anything goes wrong. So you develop a medical app and you say this guy's got cancer and he doesn't, he comes back and sues you and takes all the IP and value of your business, and then goes, oh, you're a sole trader, well, I'll take your house too, I'll take your car and whatever else that you've got. Partnership is just two people coming together. If it's an unincorporated partnership, we're talking about two individuals coming together and working in the business. Essentially, all the advantages and disadvantages of a sole trader are prevalent in that kind of partnership. Partnerships are an interesting structure. I mean, we see a lot of corporate partnerships where two people have a company and they come back and say, okay, well, you do the research and development, I've got the contacts, I'll go out and do the selling. I'm really against partnerships per se. It's just you've got two good friends that come together and they've got big ideas and they get together and they do things, and inevitably you've got one partner that's more engrossed in the business than another, and you'll come to a point sometime down the track, it might not be in the first few years, but sometime down the track where, say, the R&D partner's doing 75% of the work and the other guy's got one contact who's managed to get the product launched. How do you value the contributions from two partners? The guy that's doing all the work is going to be going, well, I should be getting 75% of profits because I'm spending 75% of my week here. You've done one thing, but sure, it's got his money, but that's all you've done. Incredibly hard argument to have down the track. Without a partnership agreement, 50-50. The guy could be doing 99% of the work, he still gets 50% of the profits. If you're in a relationship with a friend, associate, whatever, and you've got to give away 49% of the profits because you didn't sign a partnership agreement before you started, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be very happy. I should make note, you can send out the slides after this in case anyone wants to copy these. So an incorporated partnership is two companies coming together to work with each other. It provides you with a limited liability, which we'll get to in a second. So you don't have your house and everything on the everything at risk. It's quite useful where people don't have the capital to do it themselves. So if someone's got some money stored up and another party has, you generally come together, you put it together and say, look, we'll skip the risk out, we can minimise it this way, and you guys contribute that, I'll contribute this, and we'll go from there. Generically, when partnerships start, you don't have a partnership agreement, you're just going 50-50. As that evolves, you should always try and formalise that arrangement so that you know which party's contributing what, and you have a right against your. They're usually friends or colleagues of some sort. You have rights against each other to say that if the relationship deteriorates, and we hope that it doesn't, but if it does, there's an out. Because these partnerships make lawyers very rich when they fall apart. The disadvantages are exactly the same as a sole trader. The only other additional disadvantage really is that if one partner dies or ceases to exist, partnership falls over. So if your business model is invested in that, and that's what you've gone to the market with, that structure potentially disappears and you've got to start again. Companies are the most common structure these days for startup businesses and small businesses. So simply because you take everything that you're running in your business and you put it in an entity that is at risk. So you started up and you built the medical app. Sure, you put blood, sweat and tears in it for however many hours. It sits in the company. That company by itself has the risk of that asset. So that asset diagnoses somebody that's wrong. Okay, well sure, they come back and sue the company. That might have been worth $1 million before it made a mistake. It's worth probably zero now. Yes, they take the IP of that app, but they can't go and take your house and car and whatever else you've got. We'll get to it a bit further, but I mean, we also segregate that further and sitting there and saying, well, one company might own the app and the IP and the code behind everything that's generated that value, and another company might go to the market and sell that. So if something goes wrong, someone has recourse against the company selling the product, but not the product itself. So if that product has an error, you go and say, well, you can take that company, which has no value anyway. Everything that value sits in this company. We're going to go and start this again, and we're going to call this Medico 2, Russia Limited, go to the market and restart. There's a limited tax rate of 30%. There's also a greater access to capital, which private investors like. Private investors won't lend to a sole trader. They want a company structure, they want a plan, they want business plans, strategic plans. They want a whole lot of information that enables them to see that, hey, you're as invested and as astute in your own business as they have to be to come over and give you the money that you're asking for. A company gives them a right to sit there and say, well, we can give you a loan for $500,000 to develop your product and you'll give us back interest. Or more commonly, they'll come and say, well, actually, we'll invest $500,000, your IP is worth, we think, $1 million now, we'll give you half and you give us half the value and we'll grow together. And as I said, private equity will have about a 4 to 7 year time frame. They invest $5 million, they're probably expecting a $5 million return in that period of time. I should say that they're hit and miss, private equity. They invest in around about 12 investments at any one time. I think they say if as long as the majority of those are winners, they're happy. So they do take a significant risk when they go to market. The disadvantages. The disadvantages of companies are there's probably the single biggest disadvantages for startup businesses is that as a director of a company, you are assumed to know everything in the Corporations Act, which is phenomenally long, and nobody does. In fact, I think every penalty in the Corporations Act covers a maximum of 7 years in jail if you infringe it. Never known anyone to go to jail for infringing Corporations Act issue, but you know, it just seems to be a default position of the act that comes back and says, if you stuff this up, we can do this, we can do this, and you need to know all of that information. So you do need to have a mentor or somebody with you that can kind of guide you through the common loopholes so you don't get caught up by these things. They're not overly difficult. I mean, really, it's about the common sense issues. You know, don't go out and tell the market that everything's fine when it's not. So simple things like that. They are more expensive. A company will cost you between $500,000 to start up, whereas a sole trader just gets going at no cost. There's about $250 annually to the government that they want from you. And as you get larger and larger, you've got more and more reporting requirements with the tax office and ASIC and things like that. Trusts are a very interesting structure. They've got some very common things with companies. You can provide asset protection by holding property, land, IP, and whatever in trust. a little bit more complex in companies to administer that protection, but definitely possible. The best thing about trust is it gives you the flexibility to decide how you're going to distribute your income that you're earning. Companies pay 30% on every dollar they earn. Trusts have an ability to split out income to different beneficiaries, to different countries. You can potentially pay no tax, if you've got enough of a broad range of people that you can utilise with the trust. The tax laws hate them though, and they've continually been clamping down on these things for the last 10 years. There used to be very, very lucrative rules about how you could get away with issues, not so much anymore. You're very limited in tax benefits that you can get them, but they're still there. You've just got to know and understand how the system operates. The trust doesn't pay tax itself. The trust elects beneficiaries to pay tax. So you might have a company that's a beneficiary and say, look, just pay 30% tax on my profits, that's all I want. You might have grandparents that aren't Centrelink or have a pension and aren't paying tax, and you might say, well, I'll get tax-free monies out by giving it to them, which is quite common in larger families. One of the best things about tax is if you have a non-working spouse or something like that, you can give them $18,000 or that top tax-free threshold amount, and they might gift it back to you. So you pay no tax, but you still retain the money. Not that we advise that, it just happens a lot of the time. Discretionary trust, well, there's a few issues there. Most of them are about knowing what you have to do. You have to distribute the income. If you don't elect to do that, you just pay tax at 46.5%. So very, very bad outcome. The tax office also said that you have to do that by 30 June every year, even though by 30 June you have absolutely no idea of what income's in the trust. So it makes it quite challenging, and you've got to do a bit of planning to get there. One of the big things too about trusts, unlike companies, you have fixed entitlement to the asset. So if you set up a company, there's a director that runs the company, and there's a shareholder that owns the company. In a trust, there's a trustee that effectively runs the trust, but there's no one that owns the trust. The trustee decides every year who's going to be a beneficiary of the capital and the income that the trust earns. So a lot of people set these structures up and let them go on in infinity, and then if something happens to you, you expect that, hey, your family will benefit for it. That's not always the case. You've got to have a look at who that trustee is, and there's similar to partnerships. There was a father that set up a trust, and he was generating. He had $1 million in that trust at the time, and he left the trustee appointment to his daughter, and said, I want you to give 50-50 to you and to my son. And she got it and said, well, I'm just giving it to me. And the son obviously went to court and said, no, that's not what he wanted. He wrote it here it was. And the court said, well, too bad. The trust relationship is the trustee gets to decide, and she's decided. So sorry, but go away. So very tricky. You've got to be quite careful.
A lot of the small businesses usually have their accountant as a trustee, don't they, or solicitor?
It can be common. I mean, we certainly don't act as trustee for any of our clients, but yes, it has happened. We work for an estate actually where their colleague, the business colleague, is elected as an executor. An executor is just a trustee for somebody that's died, and they claim all the assets. Big estate, phenomenal estate, and he was going to do something that the family didn't want to do because he had ultimate control. In the end, the family couldn't negotiate out of it, so they offered him $10 million just to resign and go